There's a vast variety of topics. I've tried to condense it into narrow it down to very little information, which is easy to take in, and different kinds of applications and procedures and the process you may require. Firstly, where does regulatory fit in? Earlier there were no regulations or directives for submissions. It was just an administration registration with very little information, and you receive an approval. Nowadays, you require more communication base with different target audience, with marketing, your R&Ds and health authorities, and more than information, you need data right from a new molecule or generics from preclinical stage to development and manufacturing, and reporting for your pharmacovigilance, and you maintain your licenses. What is pharmaceutical legislation and why do we need it? It's to protect the public and animal health and movement of medicinal products. And what is European Union and what does it consist of? There are 27 sovereign states, or you call it as the member states, or each country is called as member states. And these are based on national traditions and interests as regulations and directives. And directives are created by European Union law. And how is this European Union law formed? It's generated by the European Commission, based in Brussels in Belgium. And these are reviewed again by the European Parliament. They're implemented by the European Commission and judged by the European Court of Justice. These are examples of a regulation and directives. Council Regulation 76/2004, which is a centralized procedure. It is one regulation. It can take all your licenses or your marketing authorization to all the member states. And you cannot apply for one country. It automatically applies to all the EU. And this has to be imposed into national law. And the directive what we use is called Human Medicines, is Directive 2001/83 EC. And it is transposed into national law into each member state. And you require pharmacopoeia monographs, where you have a monograph for a certain active ingredient. You have to follow the European pharmacopoeia, and those just what is required in the monographs. Guidelines. For regulatory, why do we need guidelines? Guidelines, these have to be followed. It's just not there for a reason, or we can cut corners. And earlier we had EU notice to applicants of the old format, and now currently it's moved on to CTD, which is Common Technical Document. And like you have different guidelines in ICH guidelines, these are agreed by EU, US, and Japan, and they're adopted by EU. And they take over the CHMP guidelines. CHMP is another committee for human medicine products. They look into different regulations, or before imposing these guidelines into the directives, and they take over these guidelines. And the examples you have, these OECDs or REACH are advisories only. Regulatory objectives. You have no authorization, no sales. And you need an authorization, and it has to go to a procedure. And you cannot make any phase submission, like you say, I've finished my preclinical studies, can I submit now? And now I've done my clinical studies. You cannot do it in different phases. And it has to be in one procedure. And it has to comply with all the guidelines, with everything except the price of the product. Whether you take it to API, or you manufacture, you require with the GMP license, or if that site has been authorized by any EU health authorities, or if it's got a manufacturing license approved from the local country as well. And to demonstrate the quality, safety, and efficacy, and we need a quality control for batch release. And if a product manufactured outside the European Union, and you have to conduct a batch release when it enters the EU. And you have to follow the regulations for labeling and advertising into each individual markets, and update the pharmacovigilance. It's a legal basis. All human medicinal products, Directive 2001/82 EC, national application. These are different procedures. You can apply for a license in the EU. National applications or mutual recognition or decentralized procedure. national application you submit to any one member state which you choose, or a strategy where you want to apply the product. An MRP, or we call it as a mutual recognition, or a DCP, which is a decentralized procedure. Once you have a national authorization, for example, I have my license which is approved in the UK and I want to take it to different member states or different countries, I would take that as an initial RMS, which is called reference member state, and then reapply for different member states through this procedure only. I cannot go as a national licenses into different countries. With the new procedure DCP, which was kicked in about 4 years ago, you could submit into all member states or specifically required any member, whatever countries you require simultaneously, and you can pick and choose which countries your RMS are different member states or your CMSs. When we come back to the same centralized procedure, this is submitted to EMEA, just currently called EMA. It's European Medicines Agencies. This is a body which is based in London, and you have to go through a centralized procedure for products which have to be authorized by DNA or monoclonal or advanced therapeutic medical products. What is the CTD structure? The CTD structure gives you the presentation of the dossier and what it contains. The module 1, it contains a table of contents and the general information of licensing, like your GMP certificates or your manufacturing license, and it's got a whole list of documents and your annexes to fill in. And it's your introduction, and module 2 refers to the quality overall summaries of clinical, non-clinical, and the manufacturing part. And module 3 describes more of the CMC, which is chemistry and manufacturing controls. Module 4 is your non-clinical, and module 5 is clinical documentation, which is set in order. What is a full application or an abridged application? Abridged applications, we call it as generic applications. And a full new application is called self-standing. You're not cross-referring to any your innovators or patent or originator products. And when you apply an NCE or a new application, you require data under all the modules, and you need to access all data required within the module. And there's no suitable for major or minor changes, or if they're abbreviated only to certain categories, which I'll let you know. This complies with Article 8 of 3, and it should contain the information pharmaceutical, which is Module 2, preclinical, Module 3, pharmaceutical, preclinical 4, and clinical trials in Module 5, and it should include all the published literatures. Abridged applications comes under Article 10, and what is a generic? It's classified, it should contain the same qualitative and quantitative composition of the active ingredient, and it should be the same pharmaceutical form as a reference product, and it should have been authorized in European Commission for 10 years. What it waives off is, we don't require clinical and preclinical testing data required. And mainly it needs to compare, you're using the same pharmaceutical form and the same active ingredient as your originator product or your reference product. Article 10A, which is called a bibliographic. When your active ingredient is a well-established use, you would not require data from Module 4 and 5, or you can cross-refer to the published literature which has been available for the last 10 years or so, whenever it's been authorized. But you need a complete data from Module 3, which is a CMC, and your manufacturing. Article 10B, which is a new combination of authorized active ingredients, and you need data on each ingredient. Article 10C, we call it as informed consent. It's called, in a company, you can cross-referring to the data for the same product. I've given an example as when a company holds an existing marketing authorization or license, there's an agreement between both the companies, and you're cross-referring only to the sections of 4 and 5, and not to Module 3. Informed consent, you're informing all the data, but all it requires is authorization from the company 1. European product approval procedures, as I said earlier, it's these 4 procedures. Either you could apply to a national procedure or a centralized procedure with all over EU, or a mutual recognition procedure, which is from member states, which has been authorized in any member state and then as a national initially and then to other countries. As a decentralized procedures, I'm not going in detail with each of these procedures, that will take me for long, and I've just given an overview of each, what it is. It's a single application, standalone to each member state or each country. It could be a first phase before you take it to an MRP. As you said, you need a license or registered in one country. And there's no set timetable for the member states concerned. They say it's 210 days in reality or directive, but it's extremely hard if you could try to get an approval within 200 days or specified time. And possibility of appeal, it's very likely, unlikely. It depends on the country and which markets you segment into. It cannot arbitration, not possible. It's only by CHMP members. Centralized procedure, apply from anywhere in the EU, is administered by European Medicines Agency, evaluated by a panel of experts by CHMP, and CHMP members consists of each person from each member state, and they opt for one rapporteur and co-rapporteur who reviews the files, and you cannot pick and choose which country or which member you would like to have as a rapporteur and co-rapporteur, and it's decided by the own committee. Objections, you have to appeal to CHMP. Community decision made by European Commission. And if you have any changes to the products, you apply by variations, and you have to apply with the same centralized procedure variations. Decentralized and mutual recognition procedures, there are a couple of restrictions. You cannot apply a high-tech or biotech performance products by these procedures. You have to go take it only through the CMC and the EMA. Homeopathics, only by national procedures. Applications anywhere in the EU. Administration, national authorities. Evaluation, the same national authorities. Objections, again, the coordination group of CMDH. Authorization, decision in 90 days. What happens is after a procedure, what we have is a national phase of the procedure, and where you have to implement your local SPC and pill label text, and that should be completed in 90 days. Variations, they're managed in the same way, with DCP or MRP procedures only. Once the product is authorized and it's in the market, what happens after that? You need to make any amendments to the license or MAs, or you need to renew it, or pharmacovigilance. Variations, we can classify them as type 1A or 1A IN is called immediate notifications, or type 1Bs and type 2. It's a regulation by EC 1234/2008. What are the types and which require prior approval by the authorities, or where you can implement a change and you can inform the authorities? For changes like a type 1A or a design space, you implement the change and then you inform the authorities. And changes which require prior approval of type 1Bs and type 2s. We have a whole list of guidelines of these, what kind of changes you could do for a type 1A and a type 1Bs and a type 2s, and what are type 1A immediate notifications. Type 1A, you have to notify the agency within 12 months following implementation. And immediate notifications, they have to be immediately notified. Also type 2, this is not an extension, but will have a significant impact on the quality or safety and efficacy of the product. And if you're making the changes to modifications of the SMPCs, like say pharmacokinetics of 5.2 section or dynamics of 5.4, or you're making any changes outside approved specifications, or you're changing any finished product specifications and stability data, and each change is standalone. You cannot compare. Yes, I've got the same variation done for a previous product or for a different country. And all these type 2 variations are time consuming, and it requires a lot of time. And any modifications in the manufacturing process for a biological product are directly classified as a type 2 variations. Type 1B, which is not a type 1A or a type 2 or an extension. When you say an extension, say you're changing a molecule, or you're going to a different pharmaceutical firm, or you say you have a register, or you're taking it to a different pharmaceutical form or different strengths, then you can call it as an extension. And 1B, it contains again foreseen and foreseen. This is, when you look at the variation guidelines, it gives you a list of whole, is what is 1B, and if you were making a change and if that list is not mentioned in it, then you can classify it as unforeseen and put it as Z category. And how do you decide these variations? Is it an extension? Yes. If not, you look at conditions of type 1A, 1A or IN, and then a type 2, if not, a type 1B. Looking at variations, there's something called as grouping of variations and work sharing procedures. These are started from January 2010. And what happens in a grouping of variations? You have a change and you want to apply the same change to hundreds of marketing authorizations or licenses. You can submit simultaneously for the several changes and to several licenses at the same time with one application rather than filing hundreds of applications and different fees for it. Similarly, same for type 1Bs and type 2s. You can group them. This is just an example. You have a license, MAH, and one product, and you've got two changes for the same product. If both are type 1A variations, yes, you can group them. Similarly, you have two different products for the same MAH or the license holder, and again, you can group them. And this is just another example. But you cannot, you cannot group a different classifications like a type 1A, 1B, and 1 type 2. You can do that only by work sharing procedure. And if you cannot mix a quality variation with a safety variation together. It has to be when you're grouping all the qualities together, all the safeties together. And when you group a couple of variations, for example, at NHRA UK, you need a prior approval or permission from the country, or there should be a request form to say, like, well, we plan to make these changes, and you need to justify or give them a reason why you want to make those changes. And only when they approve, you have to submit along with the approval of the grouping request. And there's something called annual reporting. So you make these changes with type 1As or immediate notifications, and you can submit them all together as one annual report. Yes, we have made all these changes in the last 12 months, and rather than applying it simultaneously. You can apply for more than one or more marketing authorizations, and you can include type 1As as well. Work sharing is the same as grouping with the same type 1Bs or type 2s. Like, they contain type 1A changes or line extensions are excluded from this, and it requires prior agreement from the CMDH reference authorities or EMA for centralized procedures, or procedures for type 2s. You need advice from the CMDH or relevant working parties. Because when you do work sharing, you're mixing a couple of changes together. For example, quality variation, you've got two type 1As, one type 2 and one type 1B. It is always classified as the highest order as a type 2, and you have to go accordingly. And say two of your changes have been approved and one is not approved, and you'll have to wait till the referral is finalized. You cannot implement those two changes which have been approved. And renewals. Renewals you do once every 5 years, and marketing authorizations for a few products you could do for indefinite term. If the new products initially, you might, I'll come back in the pharmacovigilance section, like how frequently you submit your PSURs and when do you get an indefinite renewal for it. And only one renewal except in case of safety issues from pharmacovigilance. And for products which have been authorized in late 70s and 80s, those could be difficult to be managed nationally. And for minor changes to these products, you can include them or update them into the current CTD format along with the renewal or with the dossiers, and to update those dossiers together with the current existing guidelines. And the duration of the renewals, again, it depends on your national timelines. Pharmacovigilance is, you've got a license, you made changes, and what do you do after that? It's a process you identify all the safety issues once the product is in the market. And these PSURs, or periodic safety reports, they have to present them worldwide. And also, if it's a new product, the authorities request you once for every 6 months for 4 or 3 years to generate for the risk-benefit ratio for each 6 months, like what's the product doing, is it threat, or are you getting any more ADRs or adverse events, or it has to be notified along with the plan. Or if there's been any change to the product labeling from thrice a day to once a day, or if you have made any changes to any of those sections. Why do you need these patients? Why are PSURs needed? It's for the clinical trial safety experience, or you may have relatively small numbers when the product is launched, or your control populations, it could be for a short-term treatment. Post-approval, it's for wider exposure, less control population, and the product life cycle. How does it happen? You submit a clinical trial application initially, and then apply, and you receive a CTA approvals. Then you take it to the marketing authorization. You receive your regulatory questions. You answer them. You apply for approval. And you advertise any changes. You do variations, or generic MAs will come in later on in the renewal. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free.